were Benjamin Netanyahu to land in London or any other part of the United Kingdom, would he be arrested?
So that's not a matter for me as Home Secretary.
What?
As you
You're
know,
the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper.
Yeah. So there's a proper process, Nick, and I'll just say something about that. So
Sure.
with the International Criminal Court cases, obviously that is independent. We respect their independence, and the vast majority never become issues for the UK legal process, law enforcement processes, or for the UK government. If cases ever do become a matter for the UK, then there is a proper legal process that has to be followed. There's a proper government process, including a Foreign Office process that has to be followed. And therefore, it's not appropriate for me to comment on any individual case as Home Secretary. So there are a set of processes that have to be followed in any individual case.
Okay. What do you think should happen? Let's come to your view, your personal view.
And I totally understand why you are asking me that question, Nick, but you, I know, will also understand why, as Home Secretary, I cannot comment on speculative legal processes because it's important that they are properly followed. There's a wider issue here, which is we continue to pursue the need for a ceasefire in Gaza. We've seen what has played out in the Middle East since the appalling terrorist attack by Hamas on Israel on October the 7th last year. But we've seen all the devastation that's happened in Gaza. We've seen too the appalling Hezbollah attacks that we've seen, and the behaviour from Iran.
But lastly, we can say
concerning as well.
The UK government is in support of the ICC.
So we do continue to support the independence of the International Criminal Court and believe in the importance of respecting international law. But it's also partly because the importance of respecting laws and legal processes that I'm responding in this way.
It's great to have you with us tonight. Thank you very much indeed for coming on. What do you make, just first of all, before we come and talk about the response of various countries, what do you make of the decision by the ICC to grant the warrant that the Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan has been seeking for some time now? Evening.
Good evening. It is, as you've said, a momentous decision in its 22-year history, the granting of an arrest warrant for the leader of a democratic state and also a close ally of the West. So yes, it's a major decision that's been made.
Do you think it's the right decision?
On the face of it, this is a decision that's not based upon what the court will eventually conclude. This is, of course, an interim decision by the tribunal pre-trial. So all it's deciding is whether there are reasonable grounds to believe that the crimes, international crimes, have been perpetrated. There has been a significant amount of evidence that's been placed before the tribunal, which is independent, and therefore, on the face of it, all one can say is that it's a properly constituted court. It's a court to which 124 countries are signatories, including the UK. Its prosecutor and its judges are independent. So on the face of it, it'd be difficult to say it's anything other than a correct decision.
And the response from allies of Israel has been quite interesting, Sailesh, hasn't it? Because the UK is saying, look, we recognise the ICC. The US is saying it doesn't believe that the ICC has jurisdiction over what Israel is doing in Gaza. I believe that's because Israel isn't a signatory to the ICC. Is that right? And what's your response to the US reaction to today's events?
Yes, neither the US nor Israel are signatories to the Rome Treaty.
Right.
And of course, they're entitled, therefore, to say they don't accept jurisdiction. The difficulty for Israel in its argument that it doesn't accept jurisdiction is that the ICC can accept complaints and adjudicate upon them based upon not just whether Israel is a member state, but also whether the Palestinian territories are a member state. And in 2015, the Palestinian territories did become a member state, a signatory state of the Rome Treaty, the founding treaty for the ICC. And therefore, to that extent, the ICC, at least at this stage, accepted it has jurisdiction, not only in relation to Israel's leader, but also in relation to Hamas's leader.
So because the alleged crimes were committed in Gaza, and Gaza is part of the territories that are members of the ICC or signatories to the ICC will say that falls squarely within our jurisdiction.
Exactly. But it's not frozen out Israel from arguing the lack of jurisdiction. There will be a more formal stage later on. This was just a preliminary decision by the ICC,
right,
albeit a very important preliminary decision. But the ICC has gone out of its way to make it clear that Israel will have an opportunity later on in its due process to argue exactly the point that it's been arguing internationally.
And just to be clear, does that now mean that if Netanyahu travels to London to meet with Keir Starmer, Britain would have to arrest him?
There's no compulsion on any state to arrest anyone who faces an arrest warrant. Britain is a signatory to the ICC, and therefore the starting point is that, in principle, it should, once the appropriate request has been made. But of course, it doesn't follow as night follows day. And the ICC certainly doesn't have its own police force. It cannot force states to do what they have said they will when signing up to the treaty. But certainly, as a matter of principle, one would expect that any of the 124 states would do their duty, which would be to obey any decision of the ICC.
Which presumably means that Benjamin Netanyahu is not going to be travelling to Britain or many other allies of Israel anytime soon.
There certainly may be political restrictions on that. I suspect there'll be no difficulty in travel to America. One wonders what pressure the USA will put on other states, including Britain, to ensure that such arrests are not carried out. But that's a matter for the future.
What do you make of the fact that the ICC has issued a warrant for two of Israel's political leaders and only one member of the Hamas leadership that carried out that atrocity on the 7th of October? None of those behind that attack, none of those that masterminded it, none of those that took part in it have faced arrest warrants, which seems curious, to put it mildly, Sailesh.
Firstly, given the horrendous nature of the allegations and the seriousness of them in relation to both Israelis and Palestinians, it's difficult to compare, and therefore it's difficult to say, well, it's two for one, it should be two for the other. So that's the starting point for any allegations of this enormity. The second point is that, in fact, the ICC prosecutor sought 3 arrest warrants for 3 Hamas leaders. 2 of them have been proved, as I understand it, to have died. The third, the one against whom a warrant has been issued, Mohammed Deif. The Israelis say that Deif has already been killed in one of their attacks. The ICC will continue its investigation until it's satisfied that Deif is no longer alive.
What about all those that took part in the 7th of October? Are they surely not guilty of war crimes?
On the face of it, almost certainly. The difficulty that the ICC has is firstly that it's limited by its resources. It's limited by the amount of information that it can gather, particularly in a war area. And therefore, information that's reliable is difficult to come by, much easier for that information in relation to the leaders of states and the leaders of Hamas.
Right. Let's talk about the other double standard that people have I think, legitimately raised, which is that despite the known atrocities committed by people like Bashar al-Assad in Syria, by the Iranian regime and the proxies that it uses, the leaders of those two countries, and you could name others too, have never faced an arrest warrant by the ICC. The Israeli Prime Minister and former Defence Minister now have.
Yes.
How do you explain that? Can we explain that, Sailesh?
There are a number of potential explanations or responses. One is, of course, the ICC is limited in its jurisdiction to those 124 signatory states.
Right.
So that's the first limitation. The second limitation is in relation to the information that it can gather and receive. It's a relatively small body with relatively limited resources, and particularly when it comes to war or conflicts that are huge, where it is almost impossible to send investigators. And of course, for example, in Gaza, no international press has been allowed. The gathering of information becomes very, very difficult. And of course, the third point is that there has been criticism of the ICC since it was founded, since it started its work in 2002, of being very, very focused, some would say unfairly focused, on some countries, not others. So one of the complaints has been that it's much more focused on African countries and not focused on Western countries. So, but that's a sort of criticism that one can raise against any other international tribunal.
But just on that side, the point that's been made, or the accusation that's been made by allies of Israel and Israel's leadership, is that the ICC, just like the UN, is disproportionately focused on what Israel does compared to what other states do. Is there any truth in that, in your view?
Certainly, it's going to be a point that will be heavily argued by Israel. The difficulty is because the ICC is founded to deal with 4 of the worst crimes known to mankind: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and aggression. It's difficult for any state to say, why are you picking on us rather than someone else, because of the enormity of the allegations. It's a bit like someone saying, well, why have you arrested me when there are in fact 3 other people that have committed the same crime. Of course, in an ideal world, everyone who's committed offences would face justice. In the real world, only some people do.
Sailesh, really interesting. Thank you so much for spelling that out for us. Sailesh Mehta, criminal and human rights barrister.